Hey guys, I want to walk you through how to use this grid template for putting a grid on your resources that you want to use for your drawings. So, in Classroom, you should have two copies of this. One of them is landscape format, which is this way, where it's got 10 squares going across and 8 squares going down. The other one is portrait. You should have 8 squares across the top and then 10 squares going down. So it just depends on the format of the image that you want to use for this project. So I have my image right here on the desktop, and all I need to do is just drag it and drop it in. Okay. Another way that you can get your image in if you don't have the ability to have it on your desktop is just to put your image in your drive, and then you can go to Insert, Image, and then go to Drive. Okay, so I could pick any of these images. So let's say I wanted this one, and then I would hit Insert, and there it is. So that's not the one I want to use though. So that's just an option too. And then you can see Insert Image. You can find all these different places where you can upload images from. So I'm just going to take this image that I'm going to use. This is what Maya wants to do for her drawing for the pen project. And I just dropped it on top of the grid. And now I'm just going to scoot it around and try and get it to fit. So it doesn't quite fit. And if this is what happens when you put your image into this grid, there's a couple things you can do. With this particular image, I'm going to crop it. But in some cases, you might put your image on here and it might be like way too big and you just want to shrink it down. So the only way that you can shrink your images is by using the corners. So these blue dots in the corners will help you shrink your images. But then the problem that I have now is that I have an empty square, and that's not going to work. So I'm going to use the corner to pull it back up. And the reason we want to use the corners is because if we just pulled back up from the top, now the bird gets like really tall and his head gets squished and he looks kind of funny. And we don't want this, especially if you're drawing people or portraits. We definitely don't want this. So I'm going to undo what I just did. And I'm going to pull back up from the corner to keep the aspect ratio the same. And now I'm going to go to crop image. And now you see these black things, these little black lines pop up. So I'm going to pull from the black line up until it lines up with the outer edge of my grid. And then I'm going to let go. And then I'm pretty much done. So I'm going to hit return. And now my bird fits pretty well into the grid. And the reason why I pulled it from the left and not from the right is kind of a compositional thing. So if you see there was a lot of empty space over here on the left, and there's not empty space on the right, like we'd be cutting off more of the end of the bird, and maybe we want to see that a little bit better. So we're just cutting off the empty space on the left-hand side instead. And then that also puts our image into the rule of thirds, which we'll talk about in class. So another problem that I'm having right now is that this image is in color, and I need it to be black and white because this is going to be a black and white drawing. So I'm going to go to Format, and then Format Options, and then Recolor. I'm going to just hit No Recolor, and then pick the grayscale option. So now my bird is grayscale. And if you want to, you can play with some of these settings here. If you feel like, oh, it's way too dark over there and I can't really see any details, or maybe you need it to be more contrasty, do what you need to do over here. And then nothing else you really need to be paying attention to. So we're done with the formatting. And sometimes what will happen is it will revert to being in color when you close the format window, but because you chose grayscale, it will stay that way. So don't worry about that. The last thing that I need to do is go to Arrange, and then Order, and then Send to Back. So see, it's in grayscale again. So we haven't lost anything. And now you have this grid overlaid on top of your drawing that you want to do. So this should be the exact same number of squares that you have on your paper. You should have 10 squares going across, 8 squares going down, or the other way around. And your image should fit within that 8 by 10 space. And now you're ready to go. So you can either leave it here as a Google drawing, but what I like to do is export it because then I can't mess with it, right? So you could come in here and then like by mistake pull it in one direction or the other, and maybe mess around with the settings, and then you've got something that you didn't necessarily want. So I always like to go to File and then Download, and then I'm going to choose JPEG. You can do a PDF. PNG images tend to take up a lot of space and be really slow when you try to open them, so I'm going to do a JPEG. And so for me, because I'm using Safari, it's going to go to my downloads right here. It just automatically opens in preview. If you're using a Chromebook, which most of you guys are, it's just going to go to your downloads folder, or if you're in Chrome, you have the little download thing down here in your browser, and that's where it will be. So from this point, it's going to be in my downloads folder, and let's see. Okay, so here it is. I'm going to drag it out to my desktop, and I'm going to go to Grid Template, and I can just print this if you have a printer at home. If you don't have a printer at home, then what you're going to do is just upload this to Classroom. You can either, when you're drawing, you can either draw it from your computer, or if you would like for me to print it for you, I can print it out and then mail it to you. But it's just going to take a couple days for it to get there. So, make sure, you're letting me know what you're looking for, what you want. And that is pretty much it for putting your images on a grid. So just, again, the most important thing to remember is not to mess with the aspect ratio of your image, and not to do that with the grid either. You want to make sure that your grid stays exactly how it should. You don't want your squares to be too skinny or too fat. You want to make sure that everything stays perfectly square. And these are perfect squares. The squares on your larger drawing should be perfect squares. And if any of that changes, you run the risk of getting a really warped drawing. So please make sure that everything stays the correct aspect ratio, and you should be fine with this situation. And that's about it. Let me know if you have questions on how to do this. If you need extra support, I can meet with you one-on-one and kind of walk you through it on a Zoom call. And that's pretty much it. Thanks, guys.